regarding flexible dieting, like eating rice. Rice is like one of the main carb sources over here, and country is basically like, I think I mentioned this in the email, that majority of people in our country are vegetarians, so they
Mm.
don't consume any kind of meat. They consume dairy products and all that, but they are vegetarians. So I wanted to ask, how much of an importance does protein have, in building muscle? Because there was a time when this whole vegan thing was becoming popular, and they were saying you don't need a lot of protein, protein is overrated and this and that. So my recommendation to my clients would be, if they are on a very low protein diet, I would gradually increase their protein intake. But is there a certain number? Because there are so many numbers thrown. I watched a video of you with Jeff, where you mentioned that if you can't get enough protein, you can eat according to your height, right? If you're 170 centimeters, you can go with that. But how important is protein, honestly speaking, and what's the lower limit that at least you should be consuming, to make some gains? Or how high can one go? So that's what I
Yeah,
wanted to.
that's a great question. And, I think because myself and a lot of my audience are trying to optimize things and they're trying to make progress, they're trying to get everything they can out of their physique. I mean, I'm a competitive natural bodybuilder, right? So I'm very curious about what can be even a small difference. Right. But sometimes what gets lost in that conversation of what's optimal is, well, how much of a measurable impact are we talking about here? And to give you some context on the protein conversation. So your audience might be familiar with scientific research. They may not be familiar with the term a meta-analysis. And a meta-analysis is simply when you take all of the studies on a given topic that are similar enough for you to collate their data together, so you have a larger signal to noise ratio and you can make a better conclusion about the data. And this is really important in the sports nutrition field because we're primarily looking at small sample sizes. So, like a 10 versus 10 group. And in something like 2/3 of the research on protein, you see like a null, like you don't see significant differences between a higher protein and a lower protein group. But when you meta-analyze it, you do see a difference. And this speaks to the fact that it is a small effect, So, if only 1/3 of the time we're seeing higher protein beat out lower protein, and 2/3 of the time we're seeing no significant difference, that tells you something right there. Like I have only seen one trial in my whole life where actually a lower protein group had better body composition outcomes than a higher protein group. So that's like 1 out of 1,000. So that's probably just a statistical randomness, right? So, but just because there is a difference doesn't mean that it's a huge difference. And we have to collate all these studies before it's obvious. Like if you just give me a hat of all, like, okay, here's a study where we go lifting weights, they at least 2 different amounts of protein, and we've had some measurement of body composition. You pull the study out of the hat and you tell me which group it favored. If I was a betting man, I'd be like, no significant difference. That'd be my guess, because I had probably a 2/3 chance of being right. However, when you pull all that together and say 2018 meta-analysis by Morton and colleagues that I was a part of, this is a common one, you do see a small significant effect favoring higher protein intakes. And typically where the cutoff is, where you stop seeing a benefit, is right around the range of like 1.5, 1.6 grams per kilogram. So that's big. Like if to a Westerner, that doesn't sound large, because we're a bunch of privileged guys who eat a bunch of meat, right? So like, so, the natural state of an omnivorous Westerner is that level or higher. You don't have to manipulate much. Mostly it's just from a lot of, shitty sources. But when you're talking about India, where I would guess that the average national protein intake is probably 0.3, 0.4 grams per kg
Right.
less.
Most people would get, I would say my dad, my mom, they would probably get 50 max per day as
Yeah.
as an average person, like
Yep.
who don't lift. But yeah, that's usually the average number. And even from the clients that I train, the protein intake is very low, and they do work out, right? So
Yeah.
of course there's a reason why they haven't made any gains, because that's too low, right? Like 50 grams is,
Yes.
yeah, that's too low.
So there, you're actually skirting with. Hold on, are we actually reaching the RDA? Are we hitting that 0.8 grams per kg that like the World Health Organizations and the nutrition councils have decided? Hey, this is the amount we need to not actually be losing body mass or dealing with negative health consequences at a population level. So yeah, when you're at 50 grams of protein a day, unless you're weighing 50 kilograms or less, that's you're skirting with, on some days, not being at what's probably a healthy protein intake. But we've got research where like 1 to 1.2 grams per kg, yeah, they make less gains than someone who's on like 1.6, but they still make gains. So I think there's nothing wrong with simply focusing on where is the person and then going from there. That's why I don't like just giving a blanket recommendation to people. To talk about coming from the other angle, I work with a lot of bodybuilders, and sometimes what the general population would see as a very high protein recommendation, they see as a very low protein recommendation.
Right, right,
So I
right.
worked with this gal who was actually like a Miss Natural Olympia winner, and she was regularly consuming between 3 to 4 grams per kg of protein, and which is not like it's not harmful or anything like that, but it was at the point where it was taking her carbohydrates and fats low with her training volume and with her body fat levels that I was like, man, I would really like to see you start to consume more carbs and fats. But emotionally, she's a highly successful bodybuilder. This is what I'm doing. It's worked. The previous person I consulted with is like an IFBB pro, and they said, this is the way to go. This is what everybody's doing. So I was dealing with a lot of tradition and the scary emotional risk of, I'm winning right now. Yes, I'm talking to Eric and I trust him and I want to take it to the next level, but do I really want to? I don't want to drop my protein in almost half. So, but I didn't ask her to. I didn't go to her and say, hey, let's get you down to 2.2. That's like my upper end recommendation for the off season, and you're at 4. I'm not going to slash her protein in half. So what did I ask her to do? Hey, let's stay between like 2.5 and 3.
Right.
It's not that far from what you're doing.
Yeah, that's
You
still a
already are.
lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's way more than needed, but it freed up like 100 calories of other stuff for her. And then I just knew like, all right, this won't scare her, and it'll give her the opportunity to eat another, 20, 30 grams of carbs and fat and see how she feels. And that's how I introduced it, so that I didn't potentially nocebo her, and I gave her the opportunity to feel the effects of having more balanced meals from an enjoyment standpoint, and then potentially perform better, which is exactly what happened. And then I was able to cut it down a little more, and we eventually got her down to something that started with 2 on a regular basis, which I saw was a huge win. But just like it would have been harmful for me to tell her to cut her protein in half, it's a great way to make someone feel like, fitness is impossible, to tell them, oh, you're only eating 50 grams. Well, we need to get you to 120. It's like, wow, I need to more than double my protein intake, bro. Like, but they would get better outcomes if you just told them to try to get 275, you know? So I think that's a great way to do it. What you're doing is suggesting people to make these incremental changes based upon where they're at. And sure, it'd be great to get everybody to that, 1.6 gram per kg or higher point. And the data would suggest that if you're on a vegan diet, and you're eating at least 3 meals per day, and you're roughly evenly spreading that amount or more, that'll provide just as good of gains as being on an omnivorous diet. That's great. But, 1.4, 1.3 isn't that much worse than 1.6. You know, it might add up over the years, and it might be a little less efficient, but it's not black or white. It is a continuum. And far more important than that is like your overall training structure, sleep, your overall energy intake, your rate of weight gain, etc.
All right. And one of the biggest reasons why I started believing that protein is really important is my own personal experience, which I also believe is important, because I felt when I first started taking whey protein, right? It's not because of whey protein, of course, but that 50 grams of additional protein in my diet definitely made a change. Here it
Yeah.
is believed, a lot of youngsters, like 18, 19-year-old people, kids, younger people, they think that whey protein is the reason why they started making gains. It's not, they don't they don't understand that they just added an additional 50 grams of protein in their diet, which is probably
Mm.
why they put on muscle. So for me, there was a phase when I was a vegetarian, because all ethical reasons and whatnot, but I could feel that I was not making gains, and I was kind of an intermediate during that time. So I was feeling that I was not making the same amount of gains. And over here we don't get all the beyond meats and all that. We don't have so many options. We need to stick to your cottage cheese. Here we call it
Hmm.
as paneer, and it's 25 grams of fat per 100 grams. You get 15 grams of
Yeah.
protein but 25 grams of fat. So it was very hard for me. And another question